So I think we'll get started. We're a little bit delayed. So for those that don't know me, I'm based in San Francisco. I work at RBC, and I'm an investment analyst covering the communications infrastructure space, which includes data centers, hosting, cloud, and fiber. And we've got quite an illustrious group here of CEOs, globally present collectively in terms of their assets. Some of them are customers of one another. And I'd like to start with Paul at the far end and maybe just give a brief self-introduction and just answer kind of the question of how do your customers view you in sort of the broader data center market, and how do you kind of differentiate?
Okay, great. Thanks. Paul Szurek, CEO of CoreSite. We are focused in 8 markets in the United States that are critical markets for most people in the digital business. Those markets comprise 20% of the U.S. population, about 27% of GDP, so they're large, they're wealthy, and they are dynamic from an enterprise standpoint. Several of them are the largest startup community MSAs in the world. What our customers count on us for are high quality, high performance, network dense, carrier neutral data center assets through which they can extend their business models to the consumers and businesses in those markets and work with the other enterprises in our data center ecosystems to collectively deliver a better product. It's especially important for us that we continue to develop out, as we have done, our capacity in those markets, and we continue to develop better models to enable flexibility and scalability as the changing industry dynamics cause companies to require more of that going forward. And it's an ongoing challenge, and we relish it, and we look forward to continuing it.
Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Our business at Equinix is similar to Paul's business. It's just at a different scale. So post the Verizon carve-out that will close sometime mid-2017, we will be a company that will have 175 data centers in 43 markets around the world in 23 countries. We've been in business for about 18 years, and we've accumulated about 9,000 customers. And our primary focus, similar to Paul's business, is just different on scale, is global reach and scale is a big advantage for a global company that has employees or revenue or customers around the world and wants to deal with one provider. That's an attractive aspect of Equinix. Secondly, like Paul's business, we have accumulated with these 9,000 customers deep connections between these customers. So we look like a marketplace for them to come in and connect to the networks and the cloud providers and their partners and suppliers. And so that's a big dimension of what we do on a global basis. And then we take pride, as all of us do on stage, designing and building top-rate data centers. And so we feel like our service levels and our service capability is a differentiator for our company.
Bill.
Hi, I'm Bill Stein, CEO of Digital Realty Trust. Digital is similar to both Paul and Steve in that we're in the data center business. We're a global business. We are in the power, interconnect, and space business. What we offer our customers is anything from a single rack up to 30 megs, so we're a little bit different in that respect. And we also allow our customers to expand with us on our campuses. So we have both very large campuses and very network internet gateways based in major cities throughout the world. We have roughly 2,000 customers, more than 30 markets, 140 data centers. The company is investment grade, so we're the only data center company that has investment grade rated debt. And our roots are as a real estate company. That's how we originated. So our focus remains today on owning the real estate and offering superior risk-adjusted returns to our shareholders.
Craig.
Thanks, Jonathan. Craig Scroggie, CEO of NEXTDC. Like Paul, Steve, and Bill, we are Australia's largest carrier and vendor-neutral data center operator. The company's 6 years old. We have 5 facilities currently. We're building 3 new ones. 8 across Australia will take us to just over 100 megawatts. So from startup 6 years ago today to 120 million in revenue this year. Australia's obviously a fairly small market with 25 million population relative to the North American market and Europe. So the business model is very similar, other than we're a hybrid. When we started, we made a couple of key strategic decisions. One was that the cloud, and this was 5-6 years ago, the cloud would take off and be successful, and ultimately that would be our focus from a wholesale point of view, because it would drive a rich ecosystem of customers. The second part that was unique for us was that we would sell through partners, and we looked at the traditional system integrator community, and I came predominantly from IT, software and services, not from real estate. So we took a decision there, and today we have more than 350 partners who sell our data center services, and we go all the way right down to a quarter rack up to large multi-megawatt deals for wholesale. So the partner go-to-market strategy has been an important point of difference for us, leading with that, and the role that integrators play today, moving from that best-of-breed hardware into best-of-breed software as a service, has been something that's been a critical piece of our success. Thanks.
Great. So with that, in terms of the flow, I'm going to talk a little, or have the panelists address topics relating to demand, maybe a little bit about capacity and the challenges and priorities there, and then move on to connectivity, cloud, and then kind of throw it open to the audience for questions. I'm sure there'll be quite a number. And maybe starting with Craig, as you're kind of representing the Southern Hemisphere here on the panel, and as you see the drivers for your business, the demand drivers, what's changed over the last 12 months, and how do you see that playing out differently, or how has it played out differently than what you observe in North America or other regions? And then I'll ask Bill and Steve to kind of contrast the drivers across their three regions.
Yeah. Two pieces of the business. One, obviously, is that growth in the hyper-scale cloud providers. There's no question that it remains unabated, and the need for them, obviously, to continue to keep up with that level of demand has driven very, very strong growth for us and everybody else in the industry. So that tailwind certainly continues and only gets larger. If there was one thing that you asked me this year relative to last year, is I think we just didn't anticipate how enormous that continued growth was going to be. And the second part is the massive opportunity really is continuing to serve that enterprise customer that's moving partly into public cloud and partly into private cloud. And with less than 20% of enterprises having moved out of their own on-premise data center, there's a huge opportunity still to serve that hybridized computing environment that I think will continue for some time, and it's a great opportunity for all of us.
So regional differences that you're seeing in your portfolio?
Mostly similarities. When we look back over the last 24 months, I'd say roughly 75% of our business is from either the cloud or the digital economy. And that split, I'd say 50-50. We think that the cloud is still very early, so that'll continue to be a major driver of the business. Within the digital economy, we're looking at social networking as being a fairly significant driver. And going forward, we think we're very early with Internet of Things, so that we think is going to be a big mover in the future. And we were talking about it upstairs, but I think autonomous driving, once that gets going, is a significant generator of data if we want these cars to stay on the road and not hit each other. So that's going to require an awful lot of data capacity.
And Steve?
Yeah, I won't repeat. I agree with everything Bill said. I think we're seeing the same things. And I think one of the big macro trends, John, that we're seeing is that there's a big push that everything's going to software. Software is defining everything today, from compute to storage to security. And I think we believe that over the next 3 to 5, 10 years that you're going to see more and more consumption as a service across all the components of IT. So we're really developing as many use cases as we can across all these venues, whether it's the Internet of Things or how SDN is affecting networking, or how storage is going to be procured in the future. So, and it's all enterprise driven. I think all the big service providers and certainly all our companies see the way we're going to grow customers is there's some 450,000 enterprises around the world that are big enough prospects for us to go after, to try to add to the customer base. And as I mentioned earlier, we're 18-year-old company and have accumulated 9,000 customers. And if we all do this right, and I think there's room for all of us to participate and grow in this space, is we all could have, pick up lots of new customers in the shape of enterprises across all these industry verticals, from energy and oil and gas to transportation to travel to manufacturing, retail. And so there's just a whole bunch of customers that we believe are going to take advantage of this cloud compute paradigm shift, and I think we're all going to benefit.
Well, not just cloud compute, but other use cases that are data intensive and performance sensitive. I mean, just as we track our internal data over the last 4 years, the enterprise has taken third place behind cloud and digital content, and has now exceeded system integrators and managed service providers as our third largest growth in revenues. And much of that is driven by new use cases, but also by moving, the cloud has triggered a lot of outsourcing. It's triggered a rethink of the way people do their infrastructure. And most companies are doing that in a multi-cloud type of environment, which means they need, they aren't exactly sure what that's going to look like 5 years from now. So by going into a good co-location data center that will give them the ability to scale up and maybe scale back down in the future, it enables them to make that shift much more quickly and avoid some of the barriers or impediments to doing that they otherwise encounter. And I think to some extent we're all doing that and enabling this big shift in the way enterprises do business.
So on the enterprise thing, Craig, you talked about channel, and can you elaborate a little bit in terms of how much of your absorption is coming from not the efforts of your own direct sales force or inbound inquiries, but maybe carrier partners, systems integrator partners? And then for Paul, maybe just to amplify on that, what is it that's led to success within some of these traditional enterprises? Is it just kind of the timing of adoption, or have you made proactive steps to kind of make that happen? First with Craig.
Sure. Two parts to the partner ecosystem. I think the first one is, if you think back when the IT department made decisions on best of breed hardware, it was IBM servers and HP storage or EMC, the storage tech tape libraries. All of those components had to be integrated and managed, and then you had the software stack on top, so you're integrating Oracle and SAP and other things. Now that complexity to some extent is being removed because the problem has been shifted to the large public and private cloud providers, but the integration of each of those independent discrete services is still a complex problem to solve. Getting the data on system, off one system onto another, working out ultimately how you manage all of those data sets together where they reside, it's still a complex problem. So having the partner focus solving that challenge in the way that they would have in a system integrator sense has just shifted into where the modern day digital economy has gone. Now, we look at the role of the partner. We'll have, we have more than 700 enterprise customers today, and in many instances, one single enterprise customer, say Australia Post as an example, may be served by 4 or 5 different providers inside a single facility. So they'll have a relationship with us, but they're getting served by multiple different software as a service or hardware or infrastructure as a service solution providers. So the role that the partner plays for us is a critically important one. The other component that I think is critical is where the business is coming from. And when we look inside our partner community, we spend a lot of time productizing. We don't just want them to sell a rack. We want the partner to be able to integrate what they do from a service and support point of view with the data center. And that could be anything as small as a quarter rack right up to a very large scale solution. And when they're selling, then ultimately they're not bumping up or competing against each other because the data center is not becoming the primary focus. In a lot of cases, when the customer tries to strip out the pricing, and that's why working through the channel will have a certain level of pricing shield or protection, the data center is probably less than 10% of the overall solution that's being provided to the client.
Yeah, I would only add to what Craig said, that there is a really important education process and activity that has to take place. One of the reasons we focused in the markets that we have is so that we could develop scale in a sales and marketing organization and target our marketing dollars for effective lead generation. And a lot of times what that comes down to is knowing the enterprises well enough that are out there and knowing when they're coming up to that decision. Their current, what they're using internally is something they want to move off of. The timing is foreseeable, and to get in front of them, often with partners, to figure out, how to help them make the case and understand the benefits of moving into co-location and moving into the cloud environment and all the partners available for them there. But you've got to spend the time with the customers in the market to identify when those opportunities are coming up.
So I think we could spend all panel, session on that topic, but maybe trying to bridge over into the topic of capacity and the topic of edge. And I think a couple of you mentioned performance sensitive, low latency, and to what extent are your customers wanting you to be in, say, smaller markets, or is your absorption occurring in some of the relatively smaller non-major metros within your footprint? Steve, for instance, you just, or pending the close of the Verizon assets, you're in a couple of new cities, and how does that make you think about the edge opportunity and how you position the platform going forward?
Well, I think this whole notion of the edge computing is happening to what Paul said. I think customers have people, revenue, data, cloud nodes all over the world, and they're next to either their people or their customers or the revenue, and it requires what we do for a living to house all the infrastructure to accommodate, the latency requirements and the performance and cost requirements to drive all this. So at Equinix, we're in most of the significant markets today, in the big markets in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. There's room for growth in Asia and Europe for us, but the Americas, post the Verizon transaction, we will be in pretty much every large market. Now, if you want to go to a tier 2 market, John, we're not in a lot of smaller tier 2 markets today. We're in mostly the primary big markets. The only market that's new to us in the U.S. That we hadn't been in for many years is Houston. So this will be a new market for us. And then Culpeper in the D.C. area is actually a secondary market because we're in a couple of areas in the D.C. market. But I think it's something we're watching closely. I think as the edge moves around, the edge is defined differently by the cloud providers and by enterprises. You're going to have capacity there. So it'll be interesting to see what 5G and what wireless and all the new technologies do to us to cause us to have these capabilities further out and in more places around the world. Certainly emerging markets are going to be the next step that big cloud providers are going to start to move into, and we're probably going to be invited to participate in some of those and help them as they do that.
So on the capacity question then, what are some of the key challenges that you find in finding land, power? Give us a little sense of the timeline, and perhaps for both Bill and Steve, since you're across different regions, and maybe it varies in terms of idea to reality of having fully commissioned space. You've done a lot of land banking. I think both of you have a lot of capacity left in Virginia, Dallas and Chicago for Bill, and then San Jose for Steve. So talk a little bit about how you think about that part of it so that you have capacity 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Go ahead, Bill.
So the wild card in data center development relates to the land piece. It's not only procuring the land, but it's entitling the land, and of course having the power and the fiber to support the customer. And the time to entitle varies very much by market. So in the U.S., typically it's going to take longer on the coast than in the middle part of the country. And metropolitan areas will take longer as well. Now, once you have your entitlements, we can build a shell, certainly a single, and I'd say even a double-story shell in 9 to 12 months. Again, if you're in Asia and land is tight, chances are you're going to be building a multi-story shell, and that's going to take a little bit longer. And then once you have your shell, you should be able to do a finished data center product in 3 to 4 months. That's what I would suggest.
I would completely agree with that, and I think we face the same issues. The only difference I don't know if it's a big difference in how Bill thinks about his business, but we really watch the campus environment. So where we are in these big cities today, we are adding capacity to connect multiple data centers in a campus, and we've learned the power of a campus environment to build scale and reach. And so we interconnect the assets, and I think we spend a lot of time land banking and making sure we have the capability to never go dark in a market where we know there's demand. And so we are very obsessed inside of Equinix. It's probably our strongest operating mechanism which we study our fill rates. We know when capacity is going to run out in our facilities, and we make sure that we start the build process and just in time to make sure we never run out of capacity. And I think we probably all do that fairly well in the markets that we're in. But that's a very critical thing to understand the demand and never be out of capacity in a market where you have demand. We have the same dimensions of, when you're in a Singapore and a Hong Kong, you're going to be building up. And when you're in a Chicago or Silicon Valley or Washington, D.C., you might have a couple levels, as Bill said, but you've got more space to build, and the time frames differ based on those kind of factors.
Yeah, I think it's though getting to be a bigger challenge. Entitlements are getting more difficult in the U.S., especially in the coastal markets. And frankly, I think the demand curve, I think we've all been a bit surprised at how strong the demand curve has been the last couple of years, and it seems to be self-sustaining. So I think we're all forced to be more proactive in how we do these things, and probably are not going to have the luxury of doing it just in time, but to have a lot of steps teed up beforehand so that we can get to the shell building and the power up. I mean, we did our SV7 data center. It took us 9.5 to 10 months to complete the vertical construction, but there's about 3 years of work ahead of that just to prepare for that opportunity.
So I would add to that, John, that in the 10 years that I've been at Equinix, it's never been, I don't know what Bill and Paul have seen, but it's never been an issue to stop us from, we've been fortunate to have the teams to go find space, power, and I can only think of 1 or 2 cases where we had a prolonged exercise to find space and get the entitlements and have capacity available. So, our just-in-time mentality at our company is we never want to go dark. We want to have capacity all the time, and we're just really good at timing it.
That's why we bought that land that you noted. And the other thing I should mention is that we used to just prepare a site for a single building. Now we're doing site prep for the entire campus so that we can drop the shells in place as quickly as we can drop the data center units.
So I want to go back to maybe the topic of edge and distributed footprint and direct it to Craig. So you have a broader footprint within your market compared to your international competitors, right? So Perth and Brisbane and so forth. So can you give us a little bit of a flavor for the types of demand that you're seeing in the non-Sydney, Melbourne geographies? Is it just a reflection, but on a smaller scale, of what you see in those larger markets, or are there unique requirements that you benefit from by having a broader footprint?
Sure. Look, there's no question that if you look at Australia, Melbourne and Sydney are the largest markets where all the large public and private scale hypercloud providers will deploy. It's very, very difficult to go and deploy those footprints in places like Brisbane or Canberra or Perth because they're very small communities. In a country of 25 million people, when you get into the regions, it's 2, 3 or 4 million. So it's hard to see a reasonable return on those style of investments. But we are still building large hyperscale tier 3 quality facilities in all those markets to serve the enterprise. Where the edge of the internet ultimately ends up, and Steve mentioned this before, as the customers migrate to more public and private cloud, they've got to get there. So the role that the network is playing is continually changing, and I think that's one of the most dynamic drivers of what's happening in public cloud today. So when we're building in those regions, we're building exactly the same way, we're building to the same economics, we're just deploying on a much smaller scale, ensuring that we reserve as much capital as we can to deploy where we need the investment dollars the most.
So make yourself visible if you want to ask a question. I'm going to open it up pretty soon. So subsea cables, PTC is obviously a major event for subsea capacity and so forth. And we're seeing increasingly the cable builds are being sponsored by content players as opposed to exclusively telcos. So I think you each have parts, or in some cases multiple metros within your portfolio that play in that world. Can you elaborate a little bit on how being at the landing site or close to it is a bigger factor today than, say, five years ago? We can maybe start with Steve and then Bill.
Yeah, it's a new dimension for us over the last couple of years, but a couple of facts about this, which was surprising to me over the last year as this unfolded. There was more undersea cable laid in 2016 than had been laid in the last 5 years. And historically, the telcos sponsored many of these cables in the past. Today, as John mentioned, it's being funded and sponsored by the hyperscalers, the Apples, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Microsofts, et cetera. And the amount of cable project, new undersea cable project activity today is the highest it's been in a very, very long time. And so we have teams of people around the world that are working hard to be at either end of these new cables that are being laid. And I think everybody in the room would clearly understand that with the amount of traffic that the cloud providers are predicting, with these devices we carry and with all the big data and all the analytics that's going to happen, they just know that there's not enough capacity to pass this through. And so our interest, and would be similar with everybody on stage here, is to have as many of those bits of traffic passing through our data centers. So we are working hard to be at either end or both ends of these cable projects, and we've been public. We've won over a dozen of these projects where we're landing these cables in our data centers. And years ago, they used to hit land, and they used to have to regenerate in a network pop on the beach. And today, the regeneration process, the technology is advanced, and it can take those cables inland several kilometers, and they can land at a data center. So many of our companies are, in the right locations, and we can compete to have these land in our facilities. And I think the business we're in, we want bits of traffic moving through our facilities, so it's a good thing for all of us.
But there's a symbiosis there because you have to have the community already there. You have to have the network density. You have to have the interconnection, and that's what they want when they land. And it's a big part of this the business that we're all in is serving those undersea cables.
It's interesting. Our cloud clients in particular want to control this transmission of data. They don't want to be using someone else's subsea, and they also don't want it to land in something that isn't a carrier-neutral facility. And that's what all of us offer, is something that's carrier-neutral, and I think that's why we've all been going after these opportunities. We got into this several years ago as well, and it was actually at the urging of the fellow that joined us from Telex, Tony Rasabi, who happens to be the head of the PTC. So I just want to note that. We want to thank him for pushing so hard to land those types of applications for both Telex and digital.
Great. Question in the front.
Yeah, kind of a basic question, so if everyone knows the answer, I apologize. But we talk about capacity, we talk about the pipes that bring us from one side of the world to another, we talk about the cloud, but then you introduce a word that seems very alien to me anyway, which is megawatts. So how does the power connect to the information that you're manipulating, trading, exchanging, sending, and so forth? Megawatts. I understand you got to power these things, but you actually started the sermon talking about the megawatt component of it. How does just
You need to power the servers, and you need to cool them. And the orders that your clients take are typically sized and priced based on kilowatts. So it's just within the data center. That's how we think about it, rather than square feet.
And most customers today buy on power. So they purchase, and their equations to purchase is premised on the
I don't
equipment.
buy terabytes, I buy megawatts.
You're buying access to power.
Access to power. Kilowatts, or in the big cases, it's multiple megawatts.
Tim.
Thanks. Can you talk about the Tim Moran with Oppenheimer? Clearly, the undersea fiber is being driven by the multi-hyperscale internet companies. Are you seeing the same things in your data center business in terms of demand? Maybe you can just talk about the activity over the last couple of years from these companies. And are you at all concerned that longer term, just like transport, they want to control it with data centers? Do they also want to control their own data centers, or are they going to be comfortable kind of outsourcing longer term? Thanks.
You're talking about the hyperscalers?
Hyperscale internet companies, yeah.
Well, I'm happy to start. Paul, you want to start?
Yeah, I think it really depends on their use case and what they're deploying. We don't do a lot of the really big wholesale deals, but the type of cloud activity we see in our data centers is where they need the access to the customer ecosystem, including the networks who can get them out to the customers in that MSA effectively. Customers are latency sensitive, and so we see a lot more of that edge. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, what we have are big edges in these markets, and so the uses that have to be at the edge to serve the customer effectively from the cloud providers are in data centers, all of ours, the interconnected, you know, customer dense, network dense data centers. We've seen, you know, that type of deployment grow at about a 20% CAGR over the last 5 years. So it's a big use case in these infill markets.
Inside of Equinix, it's been a drastic change the last 5 years, but your question is the last couple of years. And what I would tell you we see is all of these, and I would categorize the big cloud providers a little different than the hyperscalers. I think that term hyperscaler is thrown around pretty easily. I would call Facebook and Apple a hyperscaler, and they're not cloud companies really per se. The cloud providers are the AWSs, the Microsofts, the Googles, the IBM SoftLayers, and then you got the Chinese internet companies. So there's, and now it's moving into SaaS. But for us, it has migrated to the fact that our top 10 customers are half of the biggest networks in the world, and and the other half is the largest cloud providers in the world. So the amount of infrastructure that they're scaling around the world to enable cloud computing, which, as you heard Bill and Paul talk about, this is just the next computing paradigm shift. This is no different than 30 years ago when the world went from mainframe to mini. 20 years ago, it went to the client server. 10 years ago, it went to the World Wide Web and these devices called supercomputers in your pocket. It is the next shift. It'll go on for a decade plus, as John alluded to. And I think Bill's right, we're in the early stages. So these big infrastructure companies, these big cloud providers are putting their infrastructure, and they call them all different things, network nodes, access nodes, edge nodes, all kinds of different terms. They're putting this infrastructure all over the world to make it easy for enterprises, wherever they are, to come into our centers and access them privately, securely, and take advantage of this computing shift. And that's what you see them doing. They build a lot of their own capacity, like, in terms of server farms, and then they use wholesale and retail to accommodate the growth. So they do all three. They build these enormous server farms in the middle of nowhere where it's cheaper power, low taxes, cheap labor, and then they go to the market for their wholesale and colo needs in these big markets where we all exist. And that's their architecture.
And let me just add one thing to what Steve and I both said. You see them now in these highly connected data centers employing direct cloud on-ramps to facilitate their customer utilization of the cloud. We both have multiple on-ramps in our data centers. I think we've got 17 throughout our portfolio, and you have a multiple of that. But it's an enormous part of their business, and why these data centers that are flexible and scalable and high performance in these big markets are so important for them.
So one other point I'd like to make is a lot of these enterprises want to be able to access multiple clouds, not just one, and they want to keep some of their applications on their own servers. And for that reason, I think that model doesn't work really well with a situation where the cloud company owns its own properties. In my opinion, it needs to be on a campus, on a multi-data center campus, where the client can reside with its servers and it can access all of the cloud providers that are on the campus. So that's one reason why I think the trend would be more to leasing rather than ownership by the cloud companies. The other thing that I've seen over time is that there seems to be a shift back and forth as to the influence of finance within these cloud companies. And to the extent that finance has more influence, there's a focus on utilization and ROIC. And that's best achieved through a leasing model as opposed to buying and investing a lot of capital and waiting for it to fill up.
So I want to, we're going to go a little bit into stoppage time, but I want to ask Paul and Craig an interconnect-related question and then an M&A-related question for the two of you. For Paul and Craig, as you look at the communities of interest that have developed within your data halls and the sources of interconnect and the kind of the hub effect, what has been kind of the most surprising or fastest growing that you've noticed over the last year? And then for each of you, the most recent M&A transaction that you either have announced or closed on, why did you do it, and can we expect more of the same?
Yeah, go. Okay.
No, you first, Craig.
I had the opportunity, I did it last year, to have a look at the CES show in Las Vegas. And we're always looking for that, what is the next ecosystem that is developing? How do we seed that? What investments are we making in the partners to help facilitate, that next level of connectivity? And the commerce that's going on in there, the thing that struck me, when I look at what happened at CES this year, the volume of investment in autonomous driving, in artificial intelligence, robotics. It's not only the high-end consumer things. I mean, every smartwatch has got real-time telemetry. That data is being stored, analysed, and shared with many parties. And I think that when I look at what's happened in the ecosystem from a connectivity point of view, largely the majority of the interconnection we've got is telco-driven, business to business. But I think that the next evolution and really what we're going to see in support of this huge boom in that software as a service sector is a lot more opportunity for all of us in what's happening in that actual data, who's doing business with who, why, and the role that we will play helping those customers get from one application, get their data from one to another.
So B2C is a multiplier of interconnect traffic.
Yeah. I mean, related to that, I think one of the most surprising things is how cloud, digital, and enterprise are interrelating to drive volume in all of them and drive demand in all of them. And I mentioned earlier how we've seen the enterprise growth spike up ahead of where it was traditionally. We continue to see very strong growth in new logos. And what makes that attractive for a lot of these enterprises within these data centers is that even something as challenging as going global now, they have many options for doing that within the interconnected data center. They don't have to go global with their own data centers everywhere. They can go global via cloud. They can go global via content delivery networks. They can go global in some respects with their network partners. But it all starts with this foundation of this highly interconnected, customer-rich, partner-rich, business partner-rich ecosystem. And that's been the surprising thing to me, is that how that dynamic has opened up so many more use cases and made so many more digital products available and expandable more quickly than they would have 5 or 6 years ago.
M&A, switching gears.
M&A. Want me to go first, Bill, or you want?
We could talk about the deal we did together.
Yeah.
I guess we could talk about that too. I guess most recent news is probably on our side of the house with right before the holidays, we announced the carve out of a certain amount of assets out of Verizon. So Verizon was trying to sell, I think, 53 or 52 data centers, and we ended up winning that bid. It was a hotly contested bid that went on for quite a while, and we are going to carve out 29 of these assets, mostly in the Americas, North and South America. Primary reason that we were interested in that, it gives us the NAP of the Americas, which is an asset in Miami that is the third most connected site in the United States, and it's the connection point to Latin America, and our growth in the Americas is going to predominantly be in Latin America. It put us in 3 new markets. It put us in Houston, as we mentioned earlier. It also put us into Culpeper, which is a campus environment that does deep business in the government. So it accelerates our business into the U.S. government activity. And it also puts us in Bogota. I told my president of the Americas I'm happy to go visit after he returns safely from 2 or 3 trips. And then I'll go down and visit. So it put us in 3 new markets. It increases the interconnection density. It gives us more scale and reach in the Americas. And it's a highly accretive deal, which our shareholders were very happy about. It's a carve-out. It'll be tough work. Thank God it's in the Americas region for us because we've got an integration going on in Japan with a company called BidIsle that's not complete yet, and we have an integration going on in Europe with Telecity. So we're very, very busy in 2017, but our eyes are wide open. We will continue to scale the company through organic and inorganic activity.
Bill, you get the last word.
Sure. I mean, our most recent acquisition was we purchased 8 properties from Equinix and sold 1 property that was not in that package to Equinix pretty much at the same time. We bought 5 buildings in London, 2 in Amsterdam, and 1 in Frankfurt. And it was a way for us to expand our Telex platform, which was the colo and interconnection platform, into Europe inorganically as opposed to organically, which would have taken more time. And then the reason we sold Paris to Steve, in addition to he asked for it, but Equinix was the predominant tenant there. They had about 88% of the space, and we didn't see a lot of growth because it was a relatively long lease situation with Equinix. So in terms of what we see, I think that this has been a fragmented industry that is maturing, and with maturation comes consolidation. So I would expect that you'll see continuing consolidation, and digital has been acquired historically since we were formed in 2001, and we'll continue to focus on organic and inorganic growth as well.
Great. Well, we are out of time. Thanks, everybody, for participating, and we'll cut to lunch now.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.